I was asked to come up and talk about our bee survey, is something that we put in place last year, and to talk to you about what it is, why we put it in place, and what we kind of hope to get out of it. So to give you a quick idea of what I'm going to talk about, we'll quickly run over what my veg management program is, and then we'll jump into the bee survey. So who is the New York Power Authority? The New York Power Authority is America's largest state-owned power organization. We have 1,400 circuit miles of transmission line, which is about 16,000 acres across the state. We have over a third of the high voltage transmission system that's in New York State. And you can see that we cover all across the state. So we do pass through all the major physiogeographic areas in New York. You can see we run up from the northern end all the way down to the southern end, through the valleys, through the mountains that we have. So it's quite a diverse area that my power lines run through. We do pass through some populated suburban areas. We go through Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, and Fishkill, which is down near New York City. And of course, in New York State, it's a great area for vegetation to grow. You know, the temperate, warm, hot, continental climate regimes broadly support forested vegetation. And if you look at where my power lines run across New York State, I would say that they run through approximately 85% forested areas. So what is the vegetation management program that we have? We have a really intensive integrated vegetation management program. It's been in place for over 20 years at the Power Authority, and we're on what we call a 4-year cycle. So what is a 4-year cycle? So basically you split the system into 4 pieces. So 1 quarter of the system is going through a vegetation inventory. At the same time, another quarter is going through regular maintenance. Another quarter is going through a QA/QC to ensure that the maintenance activities were performed properly out there and we have the right controls for compliance. And then the last quarter just goes through patrols. The New York Power Authority has become a right-of-way storage utility, which is a 5-year accreditation. We just went through a re-accreditation last fall. We're the first utility that's done that in North America. Has gone through the second part of the re-accreditation. Our major tool that we use in our vegetation management program is GIS. We've had this platform in place since about 1998. We've incorporated a LiDAR. We use LiDAR where we fly on a quarter of our system each year, and we also use a management system called Data Splice, which takes the information from the field, puts it into our work management system so that we can create work orders and work can get done. So when we look at what's been going on recently, we see that pollinators hit the spotlight on the regulatory side, not only on the federal level, but it did on the state level as well. So New York State put in place a pollinator protection plan as well back in 2016. And I don't know if I did that or... All right, perfect. Don't want to lose my train of thought. So when you look at the New York State's Pollinator Protection Plan and you read through it, some of the requirements that really stood out in there for me was habitat enhancement. They were looking at things like sustaining landscape, endorsing IVM, or integrated vegetation management, expanding pollinator habitat on rights-of-ways, determining if future opportunities exist for pollinators, and encouraging pollinator-friendly land management practices along utility lines. They also talked about research, and in the research aspect of the plan, they did acknowledge that there was gaps out there. And one of the ones that stood out for me was status and distribution of native pollinators. So they really don't know where they are, I guess. And so what I decided to do was, since I'm a state agency and I have to be in compliance with that New York State Pollinator Protection Plan, I brought in Pollinator Partnerships and I asked them to look at my program and ensure that I was in compliance. And then I wanted to know where we could go from there. Where can we expand from there based on what they're asking in that plan? So they came in, they assessed my IVM program, and they basically said that NYPA's IVM program is an excellent example of pollinator-friendly right-of-way management. So what did we decide? Working with Pollinator Partnership, we decided to set up a bee survey. And the reason that we wanted to do a bee survey was to answer that question that was asked in the New York State Pollinator Protection Plan. We know that there's bees out on the right-of-way. We know based on the vegetation that I have out there that they're there. I've seen it over time because when I'm handling my rights-of-way out there with integrated vegetation management, I'm encouraging that low-growth shrub, scrub plant community out there. And when you look at what's been happening over time with my IVM program, the densities of that low-growth shrub plant community has increased over time. And the densities of and the heights of my undesirable vegetation has decreased. So we wanted to prove it. We wanted to put proof in the pudding. So let's go out there and let's take a look and see if or where the bees actually exist out there. So we talked about putting together 100-yard transects. We talked about randomly doing it at first, and we talked about training the people that were going to do the bee survey. So I have this vegetation inventory crew that comes in and does my inventory for me on an annual basis, and they do a quarter of my system. So I said, why don't I just build this into my inventory program? There are biologists that are out there already in the field, so why don't I ask them to do it on a daily basis for me instead of just random? So what we did is we came up with how we were going to do the survey. We said we would do a stratified random sampling. It would be done between 12 and 1 o'clock every day. It would be a 300-foot-long transect that's 10 feet wide. The axis would be along the length of the right-of-way, near the center of the right-of-way. We would pick up site information, weather information, plant species that were in bloom, and we would identify with a simple tally what bee types were there and what plants they were on. We would take a representative photo, and we would also map it on a field computer. So like I said, I brought Pollinator Partnerships back in to do training with the crews that do the vegetation inventory for me. The crews are a two-person crew, so one person would walk this transect and call out what they spotted while the other person tallied the data. And so when they got done, this is what it looked like. So they made the mark on our GIS program. You can see the orange line down the middle of the right-of-way. So that's where they did the 100-yard transect. And that's where the pollinator inventory or the pollinator data or the bee data survey was put. They took a picture of the right-of-way. So this is a picture of that exact spot that's on our GIS system. So they took a picture of the right-of-way from one end of the transect to the other. In the data that we found in the first year, we were able to do 35 sites. So that meant the crew was out there for 35 days to get my veg inventory done. And like I said, every day at noon, around noon to 1 o'clock, they would take the survey, which they covered roughly about 267 miles of line. When you averaged it out, there was 23 bees on site. What does that tell me? Well, some sites had over 125 bees on it. Some sites had none. A lot of it was weather driven. If it was raining that day or it was cold that time of the day, they weren't going to find any bees. The thing that I picked up, though, was on our survey, we asked them to identify 10 bee species, from honeybees, bumblebees, sweat bees, carpenter bees, and we had two columns for unknowns, little unknown bee and big unknown bee. And when I looked at the data, only 4% was marked up as unknown bees. So the training must have worked pretty well for these folks. I mean, like I said, they are biologists, so they're very familiar with those techniques. And that surprised me because I thought we were going to have a whole lot more unknowns out there, especially with bees. As you know, when you're trying to count bees that are on plants, they don't sit there very long. But the highest that we did find was honeybees, which I don't think that was unexpected out there. And the second highest was bumblebees, with sweat bees coming in third. So over the next 3 years, I will have completely covered my whole system, and I will have these plots everywhere out there. I can either at that point go back to the same locations because I do have them marked on GIS, or I can just go back and do random ones again. My thought here really is maybe the first year because it's a learning curve. I remember when I was in college learning how to identify trees in the forestry program, it took me a while to pick up on it. You know, now driving down the road at 70 miles an hour, I can pick out trees pretty easy. So I figured maybe the crew, after they do this for several years, they may get better. So maybe I just need to redo that first year again, just to have a little bit more accurate data. So really, when you put it all together, you look at the study here with the bee survey and some other pollinator studies that I've got going on through EPRI on my rights-of-way. If you have a right-of-way that's properly managed, utilizing integrated vegetation management with pollinators in mind, it's going to provide food, cover, shelter, and nesting habitat elements for the pollinators. And with that, I'd take any questions.
Sit down. Okay.
Have you considered taking the days that you know that there's not going to be a large bee presence out of the survey, just to see if you can get a more accurate representation of what's actually out there?
We haven't considered that yet, but that's a possibility that we can look at, you know, based on the weather, maybe based on exactly where they may have taken the survey, that we would pull it out. We just really wanted to prove the presence of bees on the right-of-way, because when you look at literature out there, there's not a whole lot of it telling you, and the Pollinator Protection Plan in New York State is saying that it's not very strong. So we just wanted to be able to prove that what we're doing, that they're there.
Lou, I got a question. Thank you for the great presentation. Very often I hear we do not necessarily want to draw attention to the habitat that we create. We do not want to put it under a spotlight. We had a vivid discussion over lunch. I don't necessarily want to attract external set of eyes looking over the right-of-way, because they might find species that we then are regulated by, or could be. You have a pollinator protection plan in the state of New York, so your hands are very tight from the beginning. But I see you step out and go above and beyond your compliance and your regulations that apply in the state. What is your philosophy behind that? Why is it that you engage in those conversations further than the regulations even require you to do? And would your point of view shift or be different if you weren't working for a state-owned utility, but, for example, a investor-owned utility?
Okay, there was quite a bit loaded in there, Stan. The difference between working for a state utility and an investor-owned, obviously I have a little bit more leeway, I think, with where I can go doing research and maybe step out of the box from the normal. Again, I think I would push back and say, based on a sound, true integrated vegetation management program, my costs have gone down, and I've been able to keep those costs in my budget so that I can spend those dollars doing this kind of stuff, research, and not just with pollinators. I've done and I am doing research in other areas. The reason that I want to do this, or want to step forward dealing with regulators or dealing with the industry, is because I think it's very important that we do that we have to drive where the future of the work is going. We can't let somebody else drive it for us. And who are the experts out here doing the work? And that's us. We have a lot of folks that come into the regulatory industry or the regulatory realm of this field that don't have the experience out here. There's a lot of new folks coming in, and when they see what's written, to me, it seems like they only see black and white and they can't see the gray. So we have to teach them. And it's very important to do that and build those relationships so that we can move forward because we're all going for the same goal here. But we have to have something that can work for us. You know, it can't handcuff us. If we get handcuffed out here, it's extremely hard for us to do our work, and it gets very expensive.